It's less than 2 weeks until Gareth Southgate will name his final squad for the 2022 World Cup, and there are some really big calls for him to make. Whilst England's squad looked pretty settled just a couple of months ago, some radical upturns and downturns in form, combined with a few notable injuries, have really put the cat among the pigeons. So in today's video, I wanted to share with you what my 26-man England squad and starting 11 would look like a typically arrogant YouTuber assuming that anyone would care, and then I'm going to take a look at what I strongly suspect will be England's actual 26-man squad, and the starting 11 that I expect Gareth Southgate to name in England's tournament opener against Iran. That way we can contrast the two, scrutinise some of Southgate's decisions, and reach the conclusion that my team and squad are far superior, and that therefore I should immediately be instated as England boss. Right then, we'll start with my 26-man squad, and in terms of goalkeepers, I would take Jordan Pickford, Aaron Ramsdale, and Nick Pope, and that is also the order that I would have them in for England. Pickford is absolutely nailed on as England's number one, deservedly so, having been brilliant for England in his only 2 major tournaments to date, and currently in the form of his life at Everton. Ramsdale is the most suitable deputy to Pickford, I think, in fine form himself this season at Arsenal, and equally calm, composed, and indeed capable with the ball at his feet. And Pope just has to be on the plane, by virtue of how good he is, and as with both Pickford and Ramsdale, his form so far this season has been very good, as the last line of defence for the team that has conceded the fewest goals in the Premier League so far this term. I've always liked Pope, as many of you will know, even from his first full season at Charlton, but I still think that he has to be England's number 3 just because of his distribution, which means that he can't be used as an outlet like Pickford or Ramsdale when England's defenders are put under pressure, and he did look really uncomfortable on the ball when England did play as though Pickford were still in goal, and I suspect that his uncharacteristic poor performances in England's last 2 internationals, whilst Jordan Pickford was out injured, will have relegated him to 3rd choice in Gareth Southgate's mind. I could be wrong, it's just a suspicion. It should also be said that Dean Henderson is very unfortunate to miss out, and it is odd that England have 4 keepers in such good form this season. On to the defenders, and it's here that Gareth Southgate has a couple of selection dilemmas caused by injuries to Reece James and Kyle Walker. James currently cannot walk without the assistance of crutches, meanwhile Walker only recently underwent surgery, yet both are still insisting that they haven't ruled themselves out, leaving the ball very firmly in the court of Southgate and England's medical team. My suspicion is that just one of them will make it, to bring some experience and on the off chance that they are able to make a return if England go deep at the tournament. I have heard some people seem outraged at the mere suggestion that Southgate might take anyone who isn't 100% fit, but this has been the case for England at almost every tournament, just as it will be for most teams at this World Cup. Jordan Henderson and Harry Maguire were both injured or had just returned from injuries going into Euro 2020, hence why they didn't start the tournament, yet Henderson scored off the bench against Ukraine, and Maguire stepped in for Tyrone Mings once fit, and went on to make the team of the tournament. So, if Southgate fancies that one of them could make a return, I think that he'll gamble, especially with this World Cup having been expanded to squads of 26 rather than 23. My understanding of the situation is that Walker is closer to a return than James, and given that he is also one of England's most experienced players, he's the one who I would take a chance on. And I suspect Gareth Southgate will be of a similar mind. Kieran Trippier seems to be nailed on, given that we already know that Gareth Southgate likes him a lot, and he has made a blistering start to the season, particularly in terms of his attacking returns. I actually expect him to start, but that injury to Reece James and the doubts around Kyle Walker should pave the way for Trent Alexander-Arnold to make the squad, who most likely otherwise would have missed out, given England's abundance of right-backs, twin with the fact that he is currently enduring his toughest spell at club level. John Stones, Harry Maguire, and Eric Dyer probably don't have to worry too much about their inclusions, but the next 1 or 2 centre-backs in addition to those 3 is probably the most unpredictable slot, or slots, within this England squad. Personally, I would take Ben White, who has been excellent for Arsenal, not just this season, but pretty much the entirety of his time there, having also earned rave reviews at Brighton and on loan at Leeds. Not only is White one of England's most accomplished defenders, he can also play at right back, and some would argue that he is actually a right back now, given how well he has played there this season, and the fact that it will be mightily difficult for him to break back in at centre-back for Arsenal without injuries to other players. So I'd take White, since he would be well equipped to play on the right side of a 3 at centre-back, or at right back in a back 4, if Gareth Southgate was concerned about Kieran Trippier and Trent Alexander-Arnold's defensive capabilities. And that leaves us with the left backs, which will almost certainly be Luke Shaw and Ben Chilwell, and they're the two who make my 26 as well. In midfield, Declan Rice and Jude Bellingham go without saying, even though I just said them to avoid any potential confusion, as does Mason Mount, and further forward Phil Foden will be one of the first names to feature in Gareth Southgate's squad. I expect Jordan Henderson to make the squad, which I think is the right decision, given his experience, leadership credentials, and the fact that he is very well liked within the squad, even if he doesn't necessarily get on the pitch. Bukayo Saka is nailed on, at least assuming that injury that forced him off against Nottingham Forest wasn't too serious, and although I have seen some people suggesting otherwise, I would be very surprised if Jack Grealish were to be left out, and indeed, I certainly wouldn't leave him out myself. After that, things get a little bit more complicated. Calvin Phillips has been out injured since the middle of September, and Pep Guardiola recently confirmed that he won't be returning for Manchester City prior to the World Cup. James Ward-Prowse has made the last couple of England squads and is clearly held in high regard. Meanwhile, James Maddison has repeatedly been left out by Gareth Southgate, having won his only cap for the Three Lions 3 years ago, but a lot of people would love to see him given a chance and to be on the plane, given his fine form for Leicester City, whilst other players like Jack Grealish perhaps have had less impact of late, at least in terms of goal contributions. My suspicion is that Phillips will make it, assuming that he is somewhat close to full fitness by the time that the World Cup starts, if not match fit or match sharp, given how well he played at Euro 2020, and the fact that he has won more caps for England than anyone else who he will be competing against for that additional midfield spot. My gut also tells me that Ward-Prowse will make it, having missed out on England's Euro squad 18 months ago, and he also makes my 26. Maddison is a really tricky one. I can completely understand the calls to take him as a bit of a wild card to introduce off the bench, given his arrogance, and I do use that term in a positive sense in this context, which means that he is unlikely to be daunted by the magnitude of the World Cup, his confidence, which should be sky high given his start to this season, and his ability to unlock a defence, and particularly a low block with a little bit of magic or inspiration. Nonetheless, not having made an England squad in so long, I would be surprised to see him included in the final squad, and I don't take issue with that as much as some people do. Maddison is great, don't get me wrong, but England are blessed with lots of players who can play that role, including someone like Phil Foden, who, I think, is undoubtedly better than him, and equally, if not even more capable, of producing a moment of magic when England need him most. To clarify, just because I have bounced around a fair bit with this one, the midfielders that I would take, assuming that Calvin Phillips is likely to be fit enough at least to return to training, are Declan Rice, Jude Bellingham, Jordan Henderson, Mason Mount, Phil Foden, Bukayo Saka, Jack Grealish, Calvin Phillips, and James Ward-Prowse. In terms of the forwards, I would actually leave out Harry Kane. Nah, just kidding. What am I like? Kane obviously is the first name in the squad and in England's starting 11. Raheem Sterling's seat on the plane is equally guaranteed. And then England have a whole host of forwards competing for probably just 2 or maybe 3 spots. You have got Marcus Rashford, Jadon Sancho, Ivan Toney, Callum Wilson, Tammy Abraham, Dominic Calvert-Lewin, Ollie Watkins, Patrick Bamford, and, if you want to call him a forward, also Jarrod Bowen. Alright, Bamford is maybe a little bit fortunate to get a mention there. I'd probably take Solanke, Ings, and Nketiah, Welbeck, and a handful of others ahead of him, but I mention him since he has made squads under Southgate in the not-too-distant past, and you get the general idea. England have a lot of possibilities as backup to Harry Kane. Personally, and this may come as a little surprise to regular viewers, I would take Marcus Rashford. Again, he brings experience to a fairly inexperienced group, capped 46 times and already having been to 3 major tournaments, though he hasn't actually made an appearance for England since the Euros final 18 months ago. Nonetheless, his tournament ceiling is higher than almost any of the alternatives, and whilst the others are likely only going to be there in case Harry Kane gets injured or England are in desperate need of a goal towards the end of a game, if Rashford makes a real impact in a game off the bench, there is every chance that he could actually start the next one. Given the fact that Southgate likes him, he's quick, and England may well play on the counter-attack if they do reach the knockout stages, and few players are more dangerous than Rashford on the break. So Rashford's in my 26, and of the handful of others, I would take Callum Wilson and Ivan Toney. I've always liked Callum Wilson, again, as long-time viewers and subscribers will know well, and though he has lost a bit of that blistering pace from his pre-ACL injury days at Bournemouth, he is still a great athlete who is a constant menace and a real handful to try and defend against. If you actually look at his goal-scoring output, it is pretty remarkable, 8 in 18 last season, and 6 from 9 so far this term. The only thing holding Wilson back, as everyone knows, is persistent injury problems. But assuming that he isn't injured, obviously, between now and the start of the World Cup, given the fact that he isn't actually going to play much unless Harry Kane gets injured, I would take him because I think he gives you a better shot of scoring off the bench than either Tammy Abraham or Dominic Calvert-Lewin. By the same logic, the other forward that I would take would be Ivan Toney, who I actually think would be the best replacement, albeit still a massive downgrade obviously, should anything happen to Harry Kane. I say that because of Toney's presence up front, his ability to hold the ball up, bring others into the game, and his confidence in front of goal. He's another one who I wouldn't expect to be daunted by the prospect of playing in a World Cup, despite his lack of international experience, and, heaven forbid, any England game goes to penalties, he's probably the second best, if not the very best penalty taker, in the entire squad. So that is my 26, assuming that I have added them up right, and I wouldn't be at all surprised if I hadn't. And I expect that Gareth Southgate's 26 will actually be quite similar. Of course, it's difficult to know with Kyle Walker, Reece James, and Calvin Phillips' injury situations, and if the diagnosis is that neither Walker nor Phillips would be able to even make a return in time for the semi-final, for example, then, obviously, it is likely that he would leave them both out. If Walker was left out, I suspect that we would see another centre-back added to the squad, given that England already have 2 right-backs or right wing-backs in Kieran Trippier and Trent Alexander-Arnold, and if Phillips is out, my suspicion is that Conor Gallagher would still be next in line, though that one is much harder to call. I think there's every chance that Southgate leaves Ben White out of his squad in favour of Connor Cody, who made the most recent England squad and has now won 10 caps, and is getting on pretty well at Everton in fairness. And even if Kyle Walker is ruled out, that wouldn't necessarily guarantee White a spot, given Mark Gay and Fikayo Tomori both made Southgate's most recent squad ahead of him. Some people might find it strange that I left Tomori out of my 26, I suspect that most people would include him in theirs, and it was a close call, and he would be my next choice if Walker wasn't able to return in time for the World Cup. As I've said in the past, I do think that some of the praise of Tomori has gone a little bit overboard, and some of the condemnation of Southgate for not starting him in every England game has had little basis in fact. Nonetheless, I would have given him more than 3 caps up to this point, but with that being the case, and being unchangeable at this stage, combined with his unconvincing performances in this season's Champions League, I just think that I'd feel more comfortable with White or Dyer at centre-back than him. Alternatively, if Walker is out, and Southgate doesn't feel that he needs another centre-back, I think James Justin is an unlikely but nonetheless feasible option, given how well he has played so far this season, and the fact that Southgate did give him his first cap back in May of this year. There's also the added benefit with Justin that he can play equally well at either left-back or right-back. In terms of the forwards, I don't expect Southgate to take Callum Wilson, even though I would, and I suspect Tammy Abraham will go instead of him and will be number 2 behind Harry Kane. There is a chance that Southgate will still pick Wilson, but if that is the case, I think that it will be ahead of Tony rather than Abraham, and that Abraham's inclusion is pretty odds on. To summarise, since I have bounced around a bit again, this is the squad that I think Southgate will pick, which only actually has 2 changes compared to mine, namely Connor Cody coming in for Ben White, and Tammy Abraham in for Callum Wilson, with the caveat, once again, of Walker and Phillips' unknown injury situations. As for England's starting 11, I don't think Gareth Southgate knows what his best 11 is just yet, despite the World Cup being less than 3 weeks away, and whilst that might seem concerning, and is a little bit concerning, I don't actually blame him. I'm fairly confident that he will go with a back 3 in possession and a back 5 out of possession, as would I, and I would be very surprised if it wasn't the same formation that we saw against Germany and Italy in the Nations League, where I thought England actually played alright despite only picking up 1 point, and again, my impression is that Southgate was also fairly pleased with those performances. The system in question is the back 3/5 with 2 in midfield, 2 inverted wingers, and a centre forward. Jordan Pickford will start in goal. I think Southgate will play Stones on the right, Dyer in the middle, and Maguire on the left as his 3 centre-backs, Kieran Trippier ahead of Trent Alexander-Arnold as right wing-back, Luke Shaw ahead of Ben Chilwell on the left side. It will undoubtedly be Declan Rice and Jude Bellingham as England's 2-man midfield, unless either of them were to get injured. And then I think that we will see Raheem Sterling on the left, Phil Foden out wide on the right, and England captain Harry Kane playing through the middle. Following those most recent Nations League games, in which Phil Foden struggled to make much of an impact, which has actually largely been the story of his England career to date, whilst Bukayo Saka was really impressive, which equally has been the story of his England career to date, I think Southgate might have been leaning towards starting Saka on the right ahead of Foden at the World Cup, just as he did from England's 3rd game all the way through to the final at Euro 2020. However, Foden has been so good for Manchester City since that international break, and is arguably the most naturally gifted player at his disposal, that with no more warm-up fixtures still to come, I think that he will most likely stick him back in there and pray that it finally starts to click, knowing that he can switch to Saka at any stage if it isn't, or even shift Raheem Sterling out onto that right flank, and play either Jack Grealish or Marcus Rashford wide on the left. I think Southgate really likes having the pace of Sterling and Rashford either side of Harry Kane, as does Kane himself, rather than the guile and creativity of a Foden or Grealish, but I would be surprised if he were to throw Rashford straight in there again, with him not having played for England in so long. Southgate also clearly adores Mason Mount, as does every manager that Mount has played under, and if things aren't working out almost anywhere on the pitch, Mount will be foremost in his mind to bring on. As he has illustrated in the past, he is perfectly happy to play Mount as a 6, 10, or even out wide on the right, and I don't see that changing at the World Cup, especially not after the way in which he changed the game and scored a goal off the bench in England's last game against Germany. So that is the 11 that I would put £10 on Gareth Southgate starting at the World Cup, assuming none of them get injured between now and then, but here is the 11 that I would pick, and why I think it's better than that one. As you can see, I have gone with a slightly different formation, still with the same goalkeeper, back 5 and 2-man midfield, but with the wing-backs offering the width, and Phil Foden playing as a number 10. The reason I prefer this setup is because I think it would get the best out of Foden, and if England can do that, then they will greatly improve their chances. You've still got plenty of width offered by Trippier and Shaw. The front 3 would be fairly flexible, so Sterling would still drift naturally out wide to the left and stretch the game. Kane would come deep, and Foden would inevitably find himself linking up with Trippier and Bellingham on the right. And what's more, when needed, Foden can also drop in a little deeper, supporting Jude Bellingham and Declan Rice to create a 3 in midfield who, I think, are in danger of getting overloaded, especially against the better teams in midfield. If you've got Foden playing in that central role, he can routinely show for the ball, creating triangles, popping off little 1-2s, and creating situations where England can actually outnumber their opponents in central areas, rather than the other way around. All of Sterling's best movements come when he moves inside from the wing towards the 6-yard box, and having him alongside Kane as a front two, I think that would give England incredible movement and a constant threat at goal. The cherry on top of the icing that is already on the cake of my suggested formation is that if, for whatever reason, things aren't working out with Foden as a 10, you can either bring Mount on, who we know can change a game and would probably bolster that midfield defensively, and could be used in that way even just to see out a game regardless of Foden's performance, or even Jack Grealish, who would flourish in that kind of free role, and lest we forget, it would also be ideal for James Maddison, but I didn't pick him in my squad, so that's a bit of an irrelevance here. Lastly, just in case you're still not convinced, and I find it hard to believe that could be the case, not only could you go Foden to Mount or Grealish at 10, if Sterling wasn't firing, it also gives you the option, unlike Southgate's system, of playing one of the other centre-forwards, whether that be Ivan Toney, Callum Wilson or Tammy Abraham, alongside Harry Kane as a front two. I know, right? I'm a bloody genius. In terms of players that I haven't really mentioned, Jarrod Bowen made the most recent England squad and is therefore obviously in contention. I just think his not spectacular start to this season, twinned with Marcus Rashford's return and much better start, will probably cost him. Jadon Sancho has won 23 caps for England at the tender age of 22, so he can't be too far off. But again, his start to this season means that I find it hard to see who Southgate would leave out in order to facilitate him making the squad, and though I don't think that he'll make it either, and is the most unlikely of the three, if I had to throw one curveball in there, maybe instead of Calvin Phillips if his injury is worse than first feared, my left field shout would be Eberechi Eze, who I think is sensational and does actually bring something a little bit different to the party. So yeah, that's my squad and my 11, and what I expect Gareth Southgate and England's actual squad and 11 to be. Let us know which you prefer in the comments, what changes you would make to mine, and whether you think that I'm right about the squad and 11 that Gareth Southgate will pick. But thank you all very much as ever for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Hit the like button if that was the case. As I say, let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. And feel free to subscribe and turn on notifications for much more World Cup content over the next few weeks, months, whatever, and a whole lot else, should you wish to do so. You can also find me on social media, on either Twitter or Instagram, via the username @HITC Sevens on both, should you wish to do so. Cheers.